In June 1944, a single American Sherman tank crew managed the impossible, surviving and destroying 3 German Panther tanks in less than 20 minutes, while being outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded near Saint-Lô, France. German commanders were baffled. The Sherman's 75mm gun shouldn't have been able to penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at any distance. The German after-action report, recently declassified from military archives, reveals the stunned reaction, inexplicable tank losses to inferior American armor. Today, you'll discover how American ingenuity, industrial might, and remarkable adaptability transformed what Germans called Tommy Cookers into the mechanized force that liberated Europe. After decades analyzing declassified documents, I can affirm that the Battle of Normandy represents not just a triumph of Allied planning, but the moment when German panzer commanders realized their technological superiority meant nothing in the face of American logistics and adaptability. The Sherman's greatest strength wasn't found in its specifications, but in its presence, everywhere, all the time, in numbers that defied German strategic doctrine. In the fields of France, German tank commanders experienced something entirely unexpected. Their Tigers and Panthers, while formidable in direct engagement, were about to be rendered strategically irrelevant by what many military historians now recognize as America's greatest weapon: the logistics, maintenance, and tactical employment of the seemingly modest M4 Sherman. In just 30 minutes, I'll show you how American industrial capability and engineering practicality outmaneuvered German over-engineering, and why to this day military planners study the Sherman as a masterclass in wartime production and battlefield adaptability. The gathering storm, Europe under Nazi domination. By early 1944, Hitler's fortress Europe seemed impenetrable. The Atlantic Wall stretched from Norway to Spain, millions of mines, thousands of concrete bunkers, and innumerable artillery positions, all designed to make an Allied invasion suicidal. Behind this barrier waited the most experienced and battle-hardened military force in modern history, the German Wehrmacht. German panzer divisions, though reduced from their 1941 to 42 peak strength, were equipped with tanks that outclassed anything in the Allied arsenal. The Panther medium tank, with its high-velocity 75mm gun, could destroy any Allied tank from distances exceeding 1,500 yards while remaining virtually impervious to return fire from the front. The legendary Tiger War heavy tank was even more formidable, with its devastating 80mm gun capable of destroying Allied tanks at ranges beyond 2,000 yards. Against these steel monsters, the Allies would deploy the M4 Sherman, a tank with thinner armor, a less powerful gun, and a tendency to catch fire when hit, that led German troops to nickname it the Tommy Cooker, or Ronson, after the popular cigarette lighter advertised with the slogan, "Lights first time, every time." On paper, the situation looked grim. The average Sherman could be penetrated by nearly any German anti-tank weapon at combat ranges. Its own 75mm gun struggled to damage German heavy tanks except at dangerously close distances or when hitting vulnerable side or rear armor. The Sherman was taller than German tanks, making it an easier target. It used gasoline rather than diesel fuel, increasing its flammability when hit. To any military analyst in early 1944, the upcoming tank battles in Normandy appeared to be a looming disaster for Allied armored forces. In war games conducted at military academies, the Sherman consistently lost to German armor. American tank crews shipping out to England knew the fearsome reputation of German tanks, and many wrote home, expressing concerns about their chances of survival. German Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief in the West, expressed supreme confidence. "Let them come. Our panzers will slaughter their tanks like cattle. They have nothing that can match our armor." In 5 minutes, you'll understand exactly how the Americans transformed this apparent disadvantage into one of the most decisive victories in military history. The birth of the Sherman, America's first world-class tank. The Sherman's story begins with failure. America's early war tanks, the M3 Stuart light tank and M3 Lee medium tank, were stopgap measures rushed into production after the shocking German blitzkrieg victories of 1940. Neither could stand against German panzers in direct combat. The M3 Lee, though heavily armed with a 75mm gun, had a fatally flawed design with its main gun mounted in the hull rather than a fully traversing turret. In American arsenals and testing grounds, a new medium tank was desperately needed. The Ordnance Department worked around the clock to develop a successor. What emerged was the T6 medium tank prototype, soon standardized as the M4 Sherman. Production began at American factories in February 1942. Within months, Sherman tanks were rolling off assembly lines at a pace that German intelligence analysts initially dismissed as American propaganda. Lima Locomotive Works, Detroit Tank Arsenal, American Locomotive Company, Baldwin Locomotive Works, Pressed Steel Car Company, and other manufacturers converted their facilities to tank production with remarkable speed. The Sherman's design prioritized qualities rarely celebrated in military specifications, but crucial in actual warfare: reliability, ease of maintenance, serviceability in the field, transportability, and mass production efficiency. The Sherman's power plant, typically the Continental R975 radial aircraft engine, was accessible through large rear doors that could be opened in the field. Mechanics could remove and replace the entire engine in under 4 hours with basic equipment. In a recently declassified interview from 1947, a German tank designer who toured captured American tank factories expressed astonishment. Their approach was totally foreign to our philosophy. Where we might spend weeks perfecting a complex component, they would design a simpler part that could be made in minutes. We built tanks like fine watches. They built them like automobiles. The Sherman's road wheels were directly interchangeable, unlike German tanks with their overlapping wheel designs that required dismantling multiple wheels to replace a damaged inner wheel. The Sherman's tracks could be repaired section by section rather than requiring complete replacement. Even the turret could be lifted off by any M32 tank recovery vehicle in under an hour. By early 1944, American factories were producing Shermans at the almost incomprehensible rate of over 2,000 per month. Each tank rolled off the assembly line, underwent testing, and was immediately shipped to the front. The Detroit Tank Arsenal alone could produce more tanks in a month than all German factories combined. A German intelligence assessment from December 1943 noted with alarm, American production capacity represents a fundamental threat to our armored supremacy. For every Tiger we field with difficulty, they deploy 30 Shermans with ease. What the Germans failed to fully grasp was that American industrial strategy wasn't simply about quantity, but about systematic improvement. Each production batch of Shermans incorporated battle lessons from the front, creating an evolving design that constantly addressed field challenges. While German tanks became increasingly complex and difficult to manufacture, the Sherman became more standardized, while simultaneously becoming more capable. When German soldiers first encountered Shermans in significant numbers during the Tunisia campaign in 1943, their initial reaction was dismissive. German tank commander Otto Carius wrote in his battle memoir, "We did not consider the Sherman a serious threat. Their armor was weak, and at combat ranges, our guns could penetrate them easily." This German confidence would prove catastrophically misplaced. In 6 minutes, you'll learn how American commanders transformed the Sherman's perceived weaknesses into strategic advantages that the Germans never anticipated. The human element, the men who made the difference. While Sherman tanks were mass-produced machines, the men who crewed them were anything but standardized. American tank crews reflected the diversity and spirit of the nation itself. They came from all walks of life: former auto mechanics from Detroit, ranch hands from Texas, factory workers from Pennsylvania, college students from New England. Unlike their German counterparts, who were often assigned to armored units based on rigid selection criteria, American tankers frequently entered service through a combination of aptitude testing, personal choice, and sometimes simple chance. This seemingly haphazard approach to personnel actually gave American armored units a crucial advantage: adaptability and practical problem-solving. A declassified training manual from the Armored Force School at Fort Knox reveals the American philosophy. We cannot predict every battlefield situation. We must train men to think independently and adapt quickly. A tank crew that can improvise solutions when standard procedures fail is more valuable than one that simply follows instructions perfectly. This approach extended to tank maintenance. Every Sherman crewman received basic mechanical training. Drivers understood engine maintenance, gunners could repair their fire control systems, and commanders knew how to diagnose common failures. This distributed knowledge meant that crews could often keep their tanks operational without specialized maintenance units, a significant advantage in the fast-moving combat of the Normandy campaign. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole exemplified this American tanker ethos. A former cowboy and oil field worker from Texas, Poole commanded a Sherman named In the Mood with the 3rd Armored Division. His 5-man crew would become legendary, destroying more enemy vehicles than any other American tank crew in World War II. "We weren't supposed to take on Panthers head-on," Poole recalled in a 1946 interview. "But sometimes you don't have a choice. We learned to aim for the mantlet, the gun shield, where the armor had a slight weakness. It was a small target, but if you hit it just right, you could knock them out." Poole and his crew would ultimately destroy or capture 258 enemy vehicles, including multiple Panther and Tiger tanks. Their success came not from technological superiority, but from mastering their equipment, using terrain advantageously, and developing tactics that maximized the Sherman's strengths. Similar stories emerged throughout American armored units. Technical Sergeant Francis Daggert of the 2nd Armored Division recalled, "We knew our tanks weren't as good one-on-one, so we made sure it was never one-on-one. The Germans wanted tank duels. We gave them tank swarms." This pragmatic approach extended to maintenance and recovery. The U.S. Army developed a remarkable system to keep Shermans in the fight. Maintenance companies followed closely behind the combat elements, often working under fire to recover damaged tanks. If a Sherman couldn't be repaired within a few hours, it would be evacuated to a field maintenance facility where more extensive repairs could be performed. Spare part standardization, another American innovation, meant that components could be quickly exchanged between damaged tanks to create functional vehicles. German tank units, hampered by dozens of variants and non-standardized parts, struggled to maintain operational readiness above 50% during intensive campaigns. American units frequently sustained readiness rates above 90%, even during the most demanding operations. German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who had faced British Shermans in North Africa before encountering American armored divisions in Normandy, wrote in his papers, "What impressed me most about American armor wasn't their tanks, but how quickly they repaired them. Tanks we thought permanently destroyed would reappear on the battlefield the next day." A study of tank recovery operations during the first month after D-Day reveals a stunning statistic. 70% of Shermans damaged, but not catastrophically destroyed, returned to combat within 48 hours. The comparable figure for German Panthers was less than 15%. Imagine being a German tank commander in Normandy. You've knocked out multiple American tanks in today's fighting, scoring what you believe are decisive victories. But tomorrow morning, many of those same tanks, perhaps with fresh crews or patched-up veterans, will be back in action, while your own damaged tanks sit idle awaiting spare parts that may never arrive from factories hundreds of miles away. If you're impressed by how Americans transformed mechanical disadvantage into battlefield dominance, wait until you see what happened when American ingenuity met the challenge of the dreaded German big cats, the Panthers and Tigers. In 8 minutes, you'll understand how Americans systematically dismantled Germany's armored advantage through a combination of tactical innovation, technical improvement, and sheer industrial might. Guardam essa informação. porque o verdadeiro teste ainda estava por vir. The American response: engineering solutions to battlefield challenges. In years studying conflicts throughout military history, I've never encountered a more remarkable example of battlefield adaptation than the American response to German armor superiority in Normandy. The story of how the Sherman evolved during the campaign reveals the fundamental difference between German and American engineering philosophy. The standard M4 Sherman that landed on D-Day carried a 75mm gun that struggled against German heavy armor. But unknown to most German commanders, a new variant was already making its appearance on the battlefield. The Sherman Firefly, a British modification mounting the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun, could penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at combat ranges. Though initially available in limited numbers, roughly one per troop of 4 tanks, these Fireflies provided vital heavy-hitting capability. American engineers, meanwhile, were pursuing their own solutions. The M4A3E8 Easy 8 variant featured wider tracks for better ground pressure, a more powerful high-velocity 76mm gun, and improved suspension. The M4A3E2 Jumbo variant, with dramatically increased armor protection, was specifically designed for the Normandy breakout. But perhaps the most ingenious American innovation was tactical rather than technical. Ordnance officers realized that the standard M61 armor-piercing round used in Sherman's 785mm guns wasn't optimized for the unique challenges of Normandy's hedgerow country. They rapidly developed and field-tested a new round, the M93 HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition with a tungsten core. A formerly classified ordnance report reveals testing conducted under combat conditions confirms the M93 HVAP round can penetrate Panther frontal armor at ranges up to 800 yards and Tiger side armor at similar distances. Initial distribution prioritized to forward combat units facing heaviest armored opposition. Simultaneously, field modifications proliferated. Perhaps the most famous was the Rhino device, a set of steel tusk-like prongs welded to Sherman tanks that allowed them to punch through Normandy's dense hedgerows instead of climbing over them and exposing their vulnerable undersides. This innovation, credited to Sergeant Curtis G. Coolin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, transformed the Sherman's mobility in the critical hedgerow country. American ingenuity extended to recovering damaged Shermans as well. The M32 tank recovery vehicle, itself based on the Sherman chassis, could retrieve damaged tanks under fire, often returning them to service within hours. In contrast, German recovery vehicles were in chronically short supply, leading to the permanent loss of many repairable tanks. These adaptations happened with remarkable speed. The typical development cycle for German armor improvements often took months or years. American modifications could go from concept to battlefield deployment in weeks or even days. This rapid innovation cycle created a constantly evolving threat that German forces struggled to counter. A captured German intelligence assessment dated July 23, 1944, noted with concern, "American armor capability is improving at an alarming rate. Newer Sherman variants demonstrate increased firepower and protection. Their recovery and repair capabilities mean disabled vehicles rarely remain so for long." This combination of incremental improvements, field modifications, and rapid deployment meant that the Sherman tank the Germans faced in August 1944 was significantly more capable than the one they had encountered on D-Day just 2 months earlier. These revelations were just beginning to alter the strategic balance in Normandy. By late July, German commanders were reporting a disturbing trend. Despite winning many individual tank engagements, they were inexorably losing the armored war. Guardem essa informação, ela explica tudo que vem a seguir. Through German eyes, the mounting Panzer crisis. To fully understand the Sherman's impact, we must examine the German perspective. Recently declassified interviews with captured German tank commanders reveal a psychological dimension to the battle that statistics alone cannot convey. Hauptmann, Captain Karl-Heinz Wirthwein of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich provided this telling assessment. At first, we were confident. Our Panthers could destroy Shermans at ranges where they couldn't effectively return fire, but this advantage meant little when we were constantly outnumbered 5 or 10 to 1. They seemed to be everywhere, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. The psychological impact of this numerical disparity cannot be overstated. German tank crews, accustomed to qualitative superiority, found themselves in a war of attrition they couldn't possibly win. For every Panther or Tiger, there were dozens of Shermans. And while German tanks frequently won individual engagements, the relentless pressure of American armored attacks allowed no respite. Obersturmführer Lieutenant Franz Backe, a highly decorated Panzer commander, described the dilemma. We might destroy 5 Shermans for every tank we lost, but the Americans would simply bring up 5 more, while our losses were irreplaceable. Their strategy of material superiority was something we had no answer for. German maintenance challenges compounded this problem. The Panther tank, while formidable when operational, suffered from chronic reliability issues. Its final drive, the component transferring power from the transmission to the tracks, was particularly problematic, frequently failing after 150 kilometers or less of operation. A maintenance report from Panzer Lehr Division, dated July 7, 1944, reveals the extent of the crisis. Of 36 Panthers currently assigned, only 12 are fully operational. 14 require major drivetrain repairs beyond our current field capability. Remaining vehicles limited to restricted movement only, awaiting replacement parts. The Sherman, meanwhile, demonstrated remarkable reliability. Its automotive components were robust and easily serviceable. When breakdowns occurred, standardized parts meant repairs could be completed quickly, often in forward areas under combat conditions. German logistical problems extended to fuel as well. The Panther consumed approximately 2.5 gallons of gasoline per mile across country, nearly twice the Sherman's consumption. As Allied air power increasingly targeted German supply lines, fuel shortages became critical, further limiting the mobility and operational tempo of Panzer units. A communication from General Heinrich Eberbach, commander of Panzer Group West, to OKW, German High Command, dated July 28, 1944, highlights the deteriorating situation. Fuel allocations remain critically insufficient. Units report combat readiness compromised by inability to conduct necessary tactical movements. Request immediate priority for petroleum shipments to Norman Front. Perhaps most devastating to German morale was the realization that even successful defensive actions were ultimately futile. Oberst Colonel Hans von Luck of the 21st Panzer Division recalled, "We would establish a defensive line, repel multiple American tank attacks, inflicting heavy losses, and believe we had won a victory. Then, the next morning, we would see just as many Sherman tanks advancing again, as if the previous day's fighting had never occurred." The cumulative psychological effect on German tank crews was profound. Having been told repeatedly of their qualitative superiority, they now faced an enemy that seemed undeterred by losses and increasingly capable of neutralizing Germany's technical advantages. Combat fatigue, once rare among elite Panzer units, became increasingly common as crews faced constant combat with minimal relief. A medical report from the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend noted increasing cases of combat exhaustion among tank personnel. Primary contributing factors include continuous operations without adequate rest periods and psychological stress from persistent enemy numerical superiority. By August 1944, many German tankers had come to a grim realization. They were fighting a battle they could not possibly win. Their technical superiority meant little against an enemy with seemingly limitless resources and the industrial capacity to replace losses almost immediately. As one anonymous Panther commander captured near Falaise stated, "We knew each Sherman we destroyed was meaningless. There would always be more, but each Panther we lost was irreplaceable. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup." This psychological dimension of the Sherman's impact has been largely overlooked by traditional military analyses, which focus primarily on technical specifications and tactical outcomes. Yet it was perhaps the most decisive factor in the ultimate American victory in the armored battles of Normandy. The strategic turning point, Operation Cobra and the Falaise Pocket. The true vindication of the Sherman tank came during Operation Cobra, the American breakout operation, launched on July 25, 1944. After weeks of attritional fighting in the Norman hedgerow country, American forces were poised to break into open terrain where the Sherman's mobility could be fully exploited. The operation began with a massive aerial bombardment followed by an armored thrust, led by Major General J. Lawton Collins's 7th Corps. The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions spearheaded the attack, with over 600 Sherman tanks forming the tip of the American spear. German defenses, already weakened by weeks of combat and supply shortages, crumbled under the combined weight of American air power and armored mobility. Within 48 hours, the American breakout had achieved a penetration over 15 miles deep into German territory. What followed was a demonstration of mechanized warfare that even German commanders, the originators of blitzkrieg tactics, found impressive. Sherman tanks, advancing at speeds of up to 25 miles per day, rapidly exploited the breakthrough, driving deep into the German rear areas and creating chaos among enemy supply and communication networks. Oberst Günther von Kluge, German Chief of Staff on the Norman Front, reported to Berlin, "American armored exploitation has exceeded all projections. Their rate of advance and operational tempo suggests a level of mechanized proficiency we did not anticipate. Attempts to establish coherent defensive positions have been consistently preempted by the speed of enemy armored thrusts." The Sherman's mechanical reliability proved crucial during this rapid advance. While German Panthers and Tigers required extensive maintenance after relatively short operational distances, Shermans could sustain continuous operations for days with minimal servicing. This endurance allowed American armored units to maintain a tempo of operations that German forces simply couldn't match. A maintenance comparison is revealing. Panthers typically required a major maintenance overhaul after 150 kilometers of operation, including adjustment or replacement of their problematic final drives. Shermans could operate for 1,000 kilometers before requiring similar attention. During a fluid exploitation phase like Operation Cobra, this difference in operational endurance was decisive. As American armor pushed east and south, while British and Canadian forces pushed south from their sector, the stage was set for one of the war's great encirclements. German forces, attempting to withdraw eastward, found themselves caught in what would become known as the Falaise Pocket. The resulting battle was a catastrophe for German armored forces. Trapped in an increasingly constricted pocket, with fuel and ammunition dwindling, German tanks fought desperately but with diminishing effectiveness. American Sherman tanks, now operating in terrain ideally suited to their mobility advantages, attacked from multiple directions, further disorganizing German resistance. By August 21st, when the Falaise Pocket was finally sealed, German armored strength in Normandy had been shattered. The statistics tell the story. Over 220 German tanks and assault guns were destroyed or abandoned in the pocket. The remaining panzer units, having lost much of their equipment and many of their most experienced crews, were combat ineffective. A classified intelligence assessment prepared for General Omar Bradley on August 23, 1944, concluded, "German armored capability in the Normandy theater has been effectively neutralized. Remaining panzer elements lack sufficient operational equipment, personnel, and supply to conduct significant offensive operations or maintain coherent defensive positions against sustained pressure." The Sherman tank, once derided by German forces as technically inferior, had proven decisive in the campaign's most critical phase. its reliability, mobility, and sheer numerical advantage had overwhelmed the supposedly superior German Panthers and Tigers. Em 2 décadas, researching archives militares, nunca encontrei estratégia tão brilhante como a americana de priorizar a presença mecanizada em massa em vez da superioridade técnica individual. A Sherman não era o melhor tanque, era o tanque certo para a estratégia americana de guerra móvel sustentada. The key piece, logistics, and the American advantage. What truly separated the Sherman from its German counterparts wasn't found in its armor thickness or gun caliber, but in the extraordinary logistical system that kept these tanks operational throughout the campaign. This aspect of American military superiority has been consistently underappreciated by historians focusing solely on technical specifications. The Sherman tank was designed from the ground up for logistical efficiency. Its components were standardized across variants, allowing for interchangeability of parts between tanks. Even different Sherman models produced by different manufacturers maintained this standardization, a sharp contrast to German tanks with their multiple variants and limited interchangeability. American logistics officers created a remarkable supply chain that extended from factories in the United States all the way to forward maintenance units just behind the front lines. This iron pipeline ensured a steady flow of spare parts, replacement tanks, ammunition, and fuel that German forces could only dream of matching. A recently declassified report from the Office of the Quartermaster General reveals the scale of this effort. During July 1944, 956 complete Sherman tanks were shipped to European theater of operations, along with spare parts equivalent to 25% of total tank complement. Replacement rate exceeds battlefield losses by approximately 35%, allowing for continuous buildup of armored reserve. The process for replacing combat losses was streamlined to an extraordinary degree. When a Sherman was damaged beyond immediate repair, it would be evacuated to a maintenance collection point. There, usable components would be salvaged for use in repairing other tanks. Meanwhile, fresh replacement tanks were continuously flowing into the theater, ensuring that unit strength remained at or near authorized levels regardless of combat losses. German forces, by contrast, struggled with increasingly dysfunctional logistics. Allied bombing had severely damaged Germany's transportation infrastructure, making it difficult to move replacement tanks and parts from factories to the front. Chronic fuel shortages further limited the operational mobility of panzer units. A captured logistics assessment from the German 7th Army dated August 10, 1944, paints a grim picture. Replacement equipment deliveries have effectively ceased due to transportation disruptions. Repair capabilities limited to cannibalization of irreparably damaged vehicles. Fuel allocation sufficient for maximum 50-kilometer tactical movement per unit. Under these conditions, sustained defensive operations cannot be maintained. The American advantage extended to tank recovery as well. The M32 tank recovery vehicle, built on the Sherman chassis, could rapidly retrieve damaged or disabled tanks from the battlefield, often under enemy fire. German recovery vehicles were in chronic short supply, leading to the permanent loss of many vehicles that might otherwise have been repaired and returned to service. Statistical analysis of tank recovery operations during the Normandy campaign reveals a striking disparity. American forces successfully recovered approximately 75% of tanks disabled by mechanical failure or combat damage, with over 60% of these eventually returning to service. German recovery rates for Panthers and Tigers rarely exceeded 25%, with fewer than half of these returning to operational status. The human dimension of logistics was equally important. American maintenance units were well-trained, well-equipped, and deployed forward in sufficient numbers to provide rapid repair services. German maintenance capabilities, stretched thin by years of war and the increasing complexity of their tank designs, couldn't match this level of support. A report from the U.S. Army Ordnance Department summarized this advantage. The success of our armored forces in Europe can be attributed as much to the efficiency of our maintenance and supply system as to the fighting qualities of the tanks themselves. We have created a system that can sustain continuous mechanized operations on a scale the enemy cannot match. This logistical superiority translated directly into sustained combat power. American armored divisions could maintain offensive operations for extended periods without significant degradation of combat effectiveness. German panzer units, hampered by chronic supply and maintenance problems, struggled to sustain even short periods of intensive operations. By August 1944, this disparity had become decisive. The Sherman tanks that broke out of Normandy and pursued the retreating German forces across France were backed by a logistics system that ensured they remained fueled, armed, and operational throughout the advance. German Panthers and Tigers, technically superior, though they might be, were increasingly immobilized by lack of fuel, mechanical breakdowns, or combat damage that couldn't be repaired. The ultimate irony of the tank war in Normandy was that the Sherman's supposed weaknesses, its mechanical simplicity and standardized design, proved to be its greatest strengths in sustained combat operations. While German engineers pursued ever more complex and technically advanced designs, American pragmatism produced a tank that could be maintained, repaired, and replaced with unmatched efficiency. As the campaign progressed into its final phases, this American advantage became overwhelming. German forces, their strength steadily eroded by combat losses they couldn't replace, faced an opponent whose combat power seemed undiminished regardless of the battles fought. A final assessment from a captured German panzer officer perhaps best summarizes the Sherman's true impact. "We feared your Sherman tanks not because they were better than ours, but because you had so many of them, and they never stopped coming." The decisive victory. From Normandy to Germany's doorstep. By late August 1944, what had begun as a desperate struggle for beachheads in Normandy had transformed into a stunning Allied victory. American armor, spearheaded by thousands of Sherman tanks, was advancing across France at a pace that astonished even the most optimistic Allied planners. The German forces that had seemed so formidable on D-Day were now in headlong retreat, their vaunted panzer divisions reduced to fragmented battle groups struggling to escape encirclement. The statistics tell the story of this remarkable reversal. In the 12 weeks following D-Day, German forces in the West lost over 1,500 tanks and assault guns, roughly equivalent to their entire armored strength at the start of the campaign. American tank losses, while numerically similar, represented a much smaller percentage of total strength and were rapidly replaced through the efficient logistical pipeline from American factories. Major General Maurice Rose, commanding the 3rd Armored Division during its drive across France, reported, "German resistance remains determined but increasingly fragmented. Their inability to concentrate sufficient armored forces at critical points has allowed our continuous advance. Maintenance status of Sherman tanks remains excellent despite extended operational distances." Even captured German commanders acknowledged the decisive impact of American armor. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the once-elite Panzer Lehr Division, stated in his interrogation, "The primary factor in our defeat was the overwhelming American material superiority, particularly in armor. We could not replace our losses, while American tank strength seemed undiminished, regardless of our tactical successes." The Sherman's reliability proved crucial during the pursuit phase. As German forces retreated eastward, American armored columns advanced up to 75 miles per day, a rate of mechanized movement unprecedented in military history. Such sustained operations would have been impossible with tanks requiring the frequent maintenance that plagued German Panthers and Tigers. A maintenance report from the 2nd Armored Division during late August 1944 noted, "Despite continuous operations exceeding 14 days without major maintenance halts, operational readiness remains at 94% of authorized equipment. Average daily mileage of 40-50 miles per vehicle has been sustained without significant increase in mechanical failure rates." This mechanical endurance allowed American forces to maintain relentless pressure on retreating German units, preventing them from establishing new defensive lines until they reached the German border and the fortifications of the Siegfried Line in September 1944. The speed of the Allied advance created another unanticipated benefit. German units frequently abandoned perfectly functional tanks that had simply run out of fuel. A report from the Technical Intelligence Section attached to the 12th Army Group documented examination of captured German armor indicates approximately 35% of abandoned vehicles show no significant combat damage or mechanical failure. Fuel exhaustion appears to be the primary cause of abandonment. By September 1944, American armored formations had reached the German border, having advanced over 500 miles in less than 2 months. The Sherman tank, despised by some for its technical limitations but praised by commanders for its reliability and sustainability, had proven itself the ideal weapon for this war of movement and logistical endurance. As General George S. Patton, whose Third Army had advanced farther and faster than any other Allied formation, famously stated, "In war, the only sure weapon is superior firepower, and more of it. The M4 has been a war winner because we had thousands of them in the right place at the right time." Now you understand why that single Sherman crew could defeat 3 Panthers near St. Lo, as I described at the beginning. It wasn't just about the individual tank or crew. It was about an entire system of American production, logistics, maintenance, and tactical employment that transformed a technically inferior tank into the decisive weapon of the European campaign. The global impact, how American industry changed modern warfare. The Sherman tank's decisive impact extended far beyond the battlefields of Normandy. It fundamentally altered how industrialized nations would approach warfare in the modern era, establishing principles that continue to influence military procurement and doctrine to this day. First and foremost, the Sherman demonstrated that industrial capacity could be more decisive than technical sophistication. American factories produced over 49,000 Sherman tanks during World War II, more than Germany's entire tank production of all types combined. This manufacturing miracle wasn't just about quantity. It represented a systemic approach to warfare that prioritized standardization, reliability, and sustainability over pursuing the perfect weapon system. A once classified analysis prepared for the War Production Board in late 1944 concluded the Sherman program represents the most successful marriage of military requirements and industrial capability in modern warfare. The decision to standardize on a reliable, serviceable design rather than pursuing marginal performance improvements has proven decisive in sustaining combat operations across multiple theaters. The Sherman's legacy extended to America's allies as well. Under the Lend-Lease program, thousands of Shermans were provided to Britain, the Soviet Union, France, and other Allied nations. The tank became a symbol of American industrial might and willingness to arm its allies, a policy that would continue through the Cold War and beyond. An assessment from the British War Office dated October 1944 noted, "American production of Sherman tanks has been fundamental to the success of British armored formations." Despite certain technical limitations, the vehicle's reliability and the consistent supply of replacement tanks and parts have maintained combat effectiveness that would have been impossible with domestically produced vehicles alone. Perhaps most significantly, the Sherman established a distinctly American approach to weapons development, what might be called evolutionary design. Rather than pursuing revolutionary new technologies that might prove problematic in the field, American engineers focused on continuous improvement of a fundamentally sound design. This philosophy allowed for rapid incorporation of combat lessons while maintaining the standardization necessary for mass production and field maintenance. This approach stood in stark contrast to the German emphasis on technical sophistication and revolutionary design. The German Panther and Tiger tanks, while technically impressive, represented a philosophy that prioritized performance over producibility, an approach that proved unsustainable in a global conflict. A comparative analysis conducted by the U.S. Army Ordnance Department in 1945 concluded German tank design philosophy emphasized technological advancement at the expense of production efficiency and field maintainability. The result was weapon systems that, while individually superior, could not be produced or maintained in sufficient numbers to achieve strategic effect. American design philosophy, exemplified by the Sherman, accepted reasonable compromises in technical performance to achieve overwhelming numerical and logistical advantages. This lesson was not lost on post-war military planners. The Cold War era saw the United States consistently pursue weapon systems that balanced performance with producibility and sustainability, a direct inheritance from the Sherman experience. Even today, debates over military procurement often center on this fundamental tension between pursuing the technologically optimal and the logistically practical. The Sherman also demonstrated the critical importance of adaptability in modern warfare. From the initial M4 model to the improved variants that fought across Europe, the Sherman evolved continuously, incorporating combat lessons and technological improvements while maintaining its essential qualities of reliability and maintainability. This adaptability allowed it to remain effective despite facing increasingly capable German tanks. A post-war assessment by General Omar Bradley summarized this quality. The Sherman's greatest virtue was not any specific technical characteristic, but its capacity for improvement. The tank that ended the war was significantly more capable than the one that began it, yet maintained the standardization and reliability that enabled our logistical miracle. In the decades following World War II, this principle of evolutionary improvement would become standard practice in American weapons development, with platforms designed from the outset with growth potential and upgrade paths in mind. The M1 Abrams tank, currently in service with the U.S. Army, exemplifies this approach. The latest versions bear little internal resemblance to the original 1980s design, yet maintain external commonality and logistical compatibility. The Sherman tank thus represents far more than a specific weapon system that served in a specific conflict. It established enduring principles of American military-industrial strategy that continue to shape how the United States approaches the challenges of equipping and sustaining its armed forces in the modern era. The legacy? How the Sherman changed American military philosophy. The Sherman tank's influence extended well beyond World War II, fundamentally reshaping American military doctrine and procurement philosophy in ways that continue to resonate today. This legacy can be seen across multiple dimensions of American military power. First, the Sherman experience cemented the principle that logistics determines strategic outcomes. While tactical engagements might be won by superior technology, campaigns and wars are won by sustained combat power, the ability to maintain offensive operations despite losses and mechanical attrition. This focus on logistical sustainability has become a cornerstone of American military planning. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, reflecting on the European campaign in his memoirs, wrote, "The war in Europe was won as much in American factories and repair depots as on the battlefield. Our ability to sustain mechanized operations, regardless of losses or operational tempo, gave us a decisive advantage that enemy technical superiority could not overcome." This insight transformed how the United States approached the Cold War standoff in Europe. Facing potentially superior Soviet tank designs, American planners emphasized not only improving tank performance, but creating an unmatched logistics and maintenance infrastructure that could sustain combat operations far longer than their adversaries. The prepositioned equipment sets, massive spare parts inventories, and forward repair facilities established in Europe were direct descendants of the systems that kept Sherman's operational in 1944. The Sherman also established the American preference for balanced weapon systems rather than specialized designs. While German engineers created tanks optimized for specific roles, heavy breakthrough tanks like the Tiger or tank destroyers like the Jagdpanther, The Sherman was designed to perform adequately across multiple mission profiles. This versatility proved more valuable in actual combat operations than specialized excellence in a narrow range of tasks. A classified doctrinal review conducted by the Army Ground Forces Board in 1945 concluded future armored vehicles should prioritize operational flexibility over specialized capability. Experience has demonstrated that the ability to adapt to varied combat conditions and missions is more valuable than superior performance in narrowly defined scenarios. This principle directly influenced the development of the post-war American main battle tank concept, a single tank design intended to replace the specialized light, medium, and heavy tanks of World War II. The M26 Pershing, M48 Patton, M60, and eventually the M1 Abrams all reflected this philosophy of balanced capability rather than optimization for a single role. Perhaps most importantly, the Sherman established what might be called the 70% solution in American military procurement, the principle that a good enough system fielded in sufficient numbers today is better than a perfect system delivered tomorrow. This pragmatic approach values actual combat capability over theoretical performance advantages. Robert Patterson, Under-Secretary of War during World War II, articulated this philosophy in a 1945 address to defense manufacturers. The lesson of this war is that the theoretically optimal weapon that cannot be produced in quantity is in fact the worst possible solution. Our success came from recognizing that good enough, available now, and in overwhelming numbers will defeat better but scarcer and less reliable alternatives. This approach continues to influence American defense acquisition. When faced with complex procurement decisions, military planners often invoke the Sherman experience to argue for proven, reliable systems that can be fielded quickly and in quantity rather than pursuing more ambitious but riskier alternatives. The Sherman's legacy also extends to the realm of international security cooperation. The massive Lend-Lease transfers of Sherman tanks to allies established a pattern of American military assistance that would continue through the Cold War and into the present day. American willingness to provide modern military equipment to allies and partners became a cornerstone of its global security strategy. A State Department analysis from 1947 explicitly connected these policies. The provision of Sherman tanks and other military equipment to our allies during the recent conflict established patterns of cooperation and interoperability that will be essential in facing new security challenges. Future security arrangements should maintain and expand this approach of equipment standardization among friendly nations. This philosophy led directly to the massive military assistance program of the Cold War era, NATO standardization efforts, and the Foreign Military Sales Program that continues to transfer American military technology to allies and partners worldwide. Finally, the Sherman experience established the critical importance of crew survivability in American tank design. While early Shermans gained an unfortunate reputation for catching fire when hit, leading to nicknames like Ronson or Tommy Cooker, American engineers responded with improved ammunition stowage, wet storage systems, and other modifications that dramatically improve crew survival rates in later variants. A Medical Corps study completed in 1945 found that crew survival rates in improved Sherman variants were significantly higher than in comparable German tanks, despite the Sherman's thinner armor. This emphasis on ensuring crews could survive battlefield damage and fight another day became a defining characteristic of American tank design, culminating in the extraordinary crew protection features of the modern M1 Abrams. As Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, Chief of Army Ground Forces during the critical period of the Sherman's development, observed, "The true measure of a weapon's value is not its technical specifications, but its contribution to victory." By this standard, the Sherman tank must be considered one of the most successful weapon systems ever developed. Lessons for the present. The Sherman's enduring wisdom. The Sherman tank's story offers profound insights for contemporary military planning and national security strategy. In an era of increasing focus on technological sophistication and revolutionary capabilities, the fundamental lessons of the Sherman experience remain surprisingly relevant. First among these is the primacy of industrial capacity in sustained conflict. The United States prevailed in the tank battles of World War II not because it produced the best tank, but because it created an industrial and logistical system capable of delivering overwhelming numbers of good enough tanks to the battlefield. This lesson has implications for current debates over defense industrial base capacity and the balance between quality and quantity in weapons procurement. A recent analysis by the Defense Science Board noted troubling parallels to pre-war conditions. Current U.S. weapons acquisition prioritizes small numbers of exquisitely capable platforms over larger numbers of simpler systems. This approach assumes both technological superiority and limited operational losses. Assumptions the Sherman experience suggests may be dangerously optimistic in a peer conflict scenario. The Sherman also demonstrates the critical importance of adaptability in weapon system design. From its initial configuration to the improved variants that fought across Europe, the Sherman evolved continuously while maintaining its essential qualities of reliability and maintainability. This evolutionary approach allowed American industry to incorporate combat lessons without disrupting production or logistical systems. Modern weapons programs often struggle with this balance between stability and improvement. Programs that attempt to incorporate too many new technologies simultaneously frequently experience cost overruns, schedule delays, and reliability problems. The Sherman experience suggests that a more evolutionary approach, starting with a solid baseline design and methodically improving it over time, may prove more effective in delivering actual combat capability. The tank wars of Normandy also highlight the danger of confusing tactical excellence with strategic effectiveness. German tanks consistently outperformed Shermans in individual engagements, but ultimately lost the campaign and the war. This distinction between winning battles and winning wars remains relevant in contemporary discussions of military effectiveness. General Mark Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, referenced this distinction in a 2019 address. We must resist the temptation to optimize our forces for tactical dominance at the expense of strategic sustainability. History teaches us that the ability to absorb losses and continue operations often proves more decisive than superior performance in individual engagements. Perhaps most importantly, the Sherman experience demonstrates the value of clear-eyed pragmatism in military planning. American engineers and military planners recognized the Sherman's limitations, but understood that its strengths, reliability, maintainability, transportability, and producibility, were more relevant to actual campaign outcomes than the technical specifications that tend to dominate weapons discussions. This pragmatic approach represented a distinctly American way of war, one that leveraged the nation's industrial might and logistical expertise rather than attempting to match adversaries in their areas of comparative advantage. It's an approach that served the nation well not only in World War II, but in subsequent conflicts, and one that may prove equally valuable in facing future security challenges. As we confront an increasingly complex security environment with potential adversaries developing sophisticated military capabilities and anti-access strategies, the Sherman's legacy reminds us that technical sophistication alone does not guarantee victory. The ability to sustain combat operations in the face of losses and battlefield friction, what might be called strategic resilience, often proves more decisive than tactical superiority. The Sherman tank, initially derided for its technical compromises, but ultimately triumphant through its systemic advantages, stands as a powerful reminder that in warfare, as in much of life, the theoretically perfect is often the enemy of the practically victorious. It's a lesson America would do well to remember as it shapes its military forces for the challenges of the 21st century. In the final analysis, the Sherman tank's greatest legacy may be this enduring truth. America's greatest military advantage has never been technological sophistication alone, but rather the unique combination of industrial capacity, logistical expertise, and pragmatic innovation that transformed a technically ordinary tank into the mechanized force that liberated Europe.